Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I know that Erin has kind of laid the groundwork of why we're here and why we're happy that you're here. And I'm always excited about starting off and kicking off the 2-day event that we love with a broad outlook, because during the rest of today and tomorrow, we're going to bring in viewpoints, and it's good to kind of start a little bit with a high level view. So I'm going to spend the next almost 40 minutes with you and just kind of touch a number of things. But let me start off by just telling you how much why we love this industry. It's the fleets are the backbone of the US economy. Hardworking, salt of the earth, and um and really supporting 80% of our GDP. And so it's an important part of the world that we live in, and all of the benefits and value that we have by living in the United States. Um, so today we're going to look at a few of the areas in the industry. We're going to talk a little bit about fleets. Um, we're going to, by kind of looking at this broadly, we'll touch on OEMs. The body manufacturers and the distributors becoming more important in the space as everybody recognizes not just the complexities that happen, but also the value that those complexities provide. Of course, dealers are where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, and even touch a little bit on remarketers. I just came last week from CAR, which is Conference of Automotive Remarketing, and we talked a lot about uh, that value to the second buyer, which when you have complex configurations in vehicles is challenging to surface, and actually that's a pretty good place to start. I really like sharing this with all of you because when I think of the ecosystem that the commercial vehicle exists in, all of the life cycle of that vehicle, all of these things that support it are unique to commercial, to helping businesses. And when you add it all up, it's a $2 trillion space every year. So let's now back up a little bit and start talking about kind of the more specifics. When we look at the production of North America in commercial vehicles, we're looking forward to about 31. And if you see, one of the things I'm always struck with is just the steadiness of this industry. And of course, it really makes sense because it's a steady industry. Every day, people get up for their jobs, whether it's delivering things or providing services or serving others in some way, and they need to have the vehicle that is going to be their tool or be the way. And so it is like the steadiness. And in fact, these are very small slide charts. I apologize, but when you look along the bottom and you see all the classes represented in this based upon last year to 36, the one thing that you probably come away with is there isn't a lot of changes that happen. There's some, I would say, moving into, or moving out of class 2, 3 light into medium and then to heavy, but it's all pretty consistent. What is interesting is when we look at the powertrain analysis and we look at what is predicted with regards to electric versus ICE versus fuel cell, which is hydrogen, versus ICE hybrid, you'll see that there is a prediction, right, that we're going to be at 6.5% in zero electric vehicle, right, by 2030. And by 2036, we'll be at over 20%. And that is a steady approach. We know that this year we went through a lot of change. There was a lot of momentum pushing the electric vehicle adoption that stopped. But in the commercial space, we're seeing that there's interest and that there's still that ROI approach. What is the value of making the change over a period of time, and is that investment make sense? And so I'm very excited to see that investment does continue to make sense, and that we expect a steady growth. We're seeing some really great players in the space, like Harbinger Motors. There's a lot of both innovation and recognition of what's important to the commercial business that is looking at a greener solution. Work Truck Solutions tracks inventory, of course, and especially in the light and medium duty space. Although I will mention, with our announced last week acquisition of Arcadium Technology, we are now heavily into the heavy duty space, et cetera. So next year we'll expect to show you a lot more data around that. But when you look at that market right now, the what's in stock and what is that acquisition movement, and what is pricing, which pricing looks like it's fairly flat, but on lot has really gone more steady and up, because as we know, back in 21, things were very, very, very tight. But also days to turn has increased. So the speed of the procurement, the build, and the delivery is really the primary advantage. And so that is one of the challenges in the market as far as data goes. We're going to identify quite a few of the existing challenges as we move through this. Also, I wanted to share with you some very recent data. This was from a survey, a series that our partners, Escalent, they're a great research and data firm, did. They have quite a few fleets that they continue to track their sentiments and the trends, etc. And you'll see here that about 50% of them, and remember, a fleet is a business that uses a fleet to accomplish their business goals. So it's not that they're a fleet and that's all they do. The fleet is an end to a means, or a means to an end. But you'll see that very, very much in that space, we're seeing an increase in understanding of AI's importance in managing their business. And we expect that to continue and escalate. We've got a little more data tomorrow that we're going to share with you as we focus a little deeper. But definitely AI adoption is happening in the world of fleets. But there are some concerns. When I looked at these from the results of the survey, I felt, well, these are pretty common, normal concerns. And I think that when we look at them in all aspects of our business, and even in all aspects of our personal lives, these make a lot of sense. I can't call any of them out other than to say possibly this industry has a little bit slower adoption rate than many industries. But I really loved the value themes. And, what really is starting to surface in this world of AI is that automation of routine tasks, and especially the ones that are really, really complicated, that require, tracking lots of details or tracking lots of data, that those are real tools that can foster the career of individuals. So we're very excited to see that this kind of feedback is becoming more and more functionally reported and validated. So, really, kind of talking a little bit about AI, and like I said, tomorrow we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But when we talk about it, for me, the big hope or the big dream or the big plan, quite frankly, is this concept of there's so much data out there. Like I said last week, I was out at a car, and what was interesting was fleets, transport folks, auctions, consultants, etc. They all acknowledge that there's a lot of data, but the problem is it's all very siloed, and so it makes it very, very difficult to have an assembly, a comprehensive way of using that data to make business decisions and to move forward. So we're going to focus more on kind of the BI part of it tomorrow, as well as the AI part. But I did want to point out that there are so many places where data now is very exciting. So, how long will it take to connect those data silos? Mm, I think that I don't have a chart here today, but we all know that escalation is um, increasing, if you can even imagine that, right? Of with agentic AI especially, and that opportunity to start connecting things that have a to be able to provide meaningful insights. I'm going to say we're going to be looking at that very quickly in the next 18 months. I think we'll see some very meaningful values that come out of these connections that will help every one of the stakeholders in this industry. Um, I'm going to use some examples now. All righty. So, transportation seems like a simple subject, but one of our panelists last week in Cleveland at Carr was a transport company, and they handle an amazing amount of different things. For example, they DID vehicles. What that means is that when you have a fleet that you're going to remarket, you can't use the name of the original owner, obviously. And one of the things that she pointed out in her part of the panel was they've had companies where they wanted to put their name everywhere, including, in the mirror and on the fender well, etc., which made it very challenging. And so we talked a lot about how you plan ahead for what the next life of that vehicle might be. But but what I was struck with was all the added value that that company was doing to prepare that vehicle, which included DIDing it, included inspecting it, it included storing it, because one of the things you want to do is kind of plan where it needs to be somewhere physically, and it's either going to be at an auction or in storage somewhere. And then where should that vehicle go? Should it be auctioned and just run through, or are there better ways using data to find the perfect match for that second owner, right? um I really think that starts showing how the combination of different datas that's soon to be ahead of us will give each of that stage of that life cycle of that vehicle. Don't forget, in transport, what you're looking at right here is a van, and I'll tell you a little story. When the transit van, there was the Transit Connect before that, which was a small van. And when the transit was announced, it was big excitement. Everybody was very thrilled. There was a lot of lead up to it, et cetera, et cetera. But when it finally showed up on the train car, it couldn't be shipped because no one had thought through the tall roof for the transport vehicles. And so these specialized configurations also are very important when it comes down to the logistics. What they had to do is they had to put only 2 or 3 of them instead of stacking them, which meant you couldn't ship as many at the same time. And so a lot of these um, software transportation companies are very good now at being able to figure out how to bundle, so to speak, vehicles to move them from one place to another to save time and maybe not money. I mean, maybe not time, but money. And then the complication of commercial vehicles adds to that. An added thing, of course, is also where the most value will be found geographically. And some of the research that we did last week to present showed that there could be as much as $20,000 to $50,000 difference in one market for a particular type of vehicle compared to another type of vehicle in a different market. So, clearly, if you could see that, for example, box trucks in Illinois are very inexpensive right now, but in New York, they're in big demand, then we have not only ways of finding that hidden value, but also making more people happy, which is part of what we want to do in this space. So I think, when we look too at this, the where the industry is right now, we're getting ready to be doing more integration. I think that finance is a good example. The way that finance works in the commercial space is very different than in retail, and it's has to be kind of evolved constantly around what the market condition is. And of course, because we went from about a zero right interest rate to not zero, it meant that there was a lot more focus on a variety of ways to finance, including leases. And in the commercial space, the concept of a track lease, which allows the gives the business more safety around what the end value of that vehicle will be at the end of life when they want to move on to the next vehicle. So it's very complex. And in fact, it's complex because of the players are in different places. When you look at the automotive part of the industry, there's a lot of players that want to finance the the consumer, and they have you have your rating, your rating ABC, whatever. But in the business space, there are different finance companies that have different ways of looking at it, and that grade businesses rather than individuals. And sometimes the individual grade is involved, and credit rating. And yet also there's the business needs for an actual credit line to run their business. So they have a bank, a local bank or a regional bank or national bank typically that they're working with. So it starts getting complicated in a different dimension. Um, there has not been a lot of recognition of that yet. We do know that there are some players in the space that we're talking to and working with that have some really interesting ideas. So stay tuned. Maybe as soon as our fall event, we'll have additional, deeper details on that. And then, of course, my favorite conversation, how personally I got excited about the industry, which is the breadth of configurations that are important. And I'm going to say that today, so we're working with a lot of the OEMs to help standardize configuration categorization. And, there's easily 40 configurations. And that's at the highest level. But once you look at a configuration and say, okay, is it a truck configuration? Is it a van configuration? If it's a truck configuration, what are all the body types? If it's a van configuration, it immediately starts dropping into what are the vocational needs for that particular van. The truck body types, they're also attached to vocational needs, but in a more general sense, typically. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And, once you start looking at a configuration, so for example, a refrigerated truck, there's so many things that become value of value. So refrigerated truck, okay, we know there's lots of them, but as soon as you start looking at what the body length is, at what kind of refrigeration unit does it have? What kind of floor type does it have? Does it have a lift gate? What fuel does this truck use? How is the wall material? Because there's a lot of interesting innovation recently in that kind of material. How is it insulated? Um, is it a door that slides? Is it a door that flips? And how is it all controlled? All of this is very much part of each unique use case for these amazing vehicles. And that value to the business is very understood by the business, not so understood across the supply chain. And that data and helping match the actual user, the fleet, the buyer is part of this new era of connecting the dots, because connecting the dots between all of the fragmented supply chain is seeable in the future. Again, it's not just for the original buyer and how critical their use case is. It's also, how much is this going to be carried forward? And I am not the right person to be giving a lecture on residual value, because this is those people that do math in their head all the time, right? But when you think about the residual value of a vehicle, and I did learn something myself, a number of years ago, is that if you're in charge of what the current value of a vehicle is, a new vehicle, that residual value, that used value, is a critical component of how that market accepts value and how that value is set. So to me, actually, since 2009, when I discovered what was going on with not being able to track what is actually on the vehicle, I felt like each one of these items was selected, these features, right, was selected for a particular purpose that was meaningful for a certain type of business. And if we could match how that's being, where it's needed, and then how it's being built through the supply chain, tracking it, making it more convenient, making it faster and easier. And then on the end, how we finance it, how it's insured. We haven't talked about insurance, but insurance is certainly one of the unique components of this whole industry status, right? Today, insurance companies are limited in how specific they can be in how they are protecting a vehicle by the value of what that vehicle is. And we haven't really talked a lot about service. Maybe I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the other, and to that point of making sure that we get the right vehicle to the right customer, to the right user, to the right fleet. I love the concept of tracking which vehicles are typically used by which vocations. And a lot of this has not been done, and it hasn't been done for a variety of reasons. I know that when companies come and search online to look for a vehicle to buy them, they often aren't using the type of use case. We have a lively discussion inside the company about why. And of course, it doesn't matter when you're creating SEO. When you're enhancing your SEO, you have to go by the behavior of the searchers. But my feeling is a lot of times that those things happen because no one's been able to solve the problem, right, of doing it the different way. I really believe that in that what I'm observing, based upon this year being at um, NADA, being at Work Truck Week, and going out on the road presenting and meeting at different dealers and different upfitters, is that with the right connection between the data silos, that we'll be able to help match the vehicle types more accurately to the use case. A lot of times what still happens today is a company will have a vehicle go down. And by the way, um, we had been using that the typical um, downtime. So we have uptime, which is, yay, everybody in the fleet world, uptime is everything. Downtime, we have done some research around what we believe the average business is losing. And I had a chance last week at NAFA to talk to the fleets that were there, and I said, I think we think it's $2,000 to $5,000 a day, and I was not shocked. Obviously, everything has gone up, but I was shocked, by the fact that is probably too low. But part of the reason why they were very clear is that we were just kind of looking at the revenue missed opportunity, when in reality, there are so many other things that happen when a vehicle goes down, because the vehicle is the connection between that company and their customers. And so there are missed promises that can affect whether or not that customer stays a customer. There are other people waiting for job one to be done so that they can do job two, three, and four. And so that's another expense to the company. And of course, it does depend on whether it's a small fleet, a smaller company, or a large one in the dollar amount that it might be. But but when you look at the percentage of their overall revenue, and whether it's short term or overall revenue for the year, the impact is as great or greater. And so I was reminded in that room with 70 fleets about how important that uptime is. Um, Also, how important the unique ability of that vehicle to do the job, which is kind of becomes right now with the state that we're in of not a lot of data silo connection. We have a vehicle that's there and physically available. Maybe you can find more of them now with technology like Convoy, which is a national marketplace, or the dealers can find more using VAST, which is Vehicle Acquisition Search Tool, to find vehicles through their network. But it still is finding something that's been built. And that it means that a fleet may have to accept a not perfect solution because of the challenge with the uptime and needing to have a replacement right then. And of course, my goal is that we'll be able to someday have such an efficient supply chain and such a wonderful connectivity that we'll be able to predict what's going to be needed by looking at data like telematics and data around, OEM and upfitter and dealer ongoing reporting of what has been moving. We see into a lot of channels on what the demand is, and bringing that all together to help. You can tell I get excited about this. So, um, I think that I went pretty fast. I know that we have a little bit more time to talk right now. I will. I don't have a helper today, so I'm not sure if I could do any open for questions. But what I will do is talk a little bit more about how we see that state, the rolled up state of today, and recap those individual pathways to that. So today, the industry is about 170 or 80 billion dollars in new sales per year, and about 160 to 70 used per year in the vehicle sales. When I look to start Work Truck Solutions, what really the two things that I wanted to solve was how do we take these incredible configurations and make sure that the right truck is in the right place at the right time for the right customer. That's kind of like the end goal, making everything move faster for all the stakeholders. The fact that no one was keeping track of what that vehicle actually became, right? So the VIN is applied to the vehicle at the beginning, but no one still to this day, other than Work Truck Solutions, collects and captures that data. I will say there are some instances. NTEA it has worked on providing availability and access for their members to use Work Truck Cert, which is a program that allows the upfitter to certify using a tag, because that's how anybody that modifies a vehicle for more than 500 pounds permanently has to certify what's been done for NHTSA. And with that data, they provide that to S&P Global. So there is some flow of data there, but it kind of makes sense because it is a very fragmented space. There are well over 2,000, probably well over 3,000 upfitters, whether they all build the same. They don't all build the same thing. Some of them specialize in a broad range. They specialize in having everything from the service body that you're looking at here, which is the number one most common upfit, all the way to a very large mechanic's truck with a crane and a welder and stuff on it. And of course, there's companies that very much focus on emergency vehicles, police vehicles, fire trucks. There's companies that specialize in the van upfits. We looked at a couple pictures of that a little bit before, and those pictures were, indicative of just the small window into the range of what can be done with a van, including very interesting vocations, mobile dog washers. We have mobile repair now. A lot of the dealers now have a van that is fixed up to do service at the customer's home, or even more exciting, at the fleet's office, so that fleet doesn't have to have any of their vehicles out or down on a weekend. So slowly, the improvement in the space is happening, but still this fragmentation of all of these upfitters, all of the OEMs, the pathways for a dealer to get an upfit can still range from it going directly to the dealer, to an upfitter, and back to the OEM, to the upfitter, to a distributor, and down. I mean, there's any combination of all of these that can happen. And that's why it's created a situation where that data has been missing for a long time. So why was it so important? Because this wonderful, big, huge, important industry has a 50% inefficiency. And that inefficiency affects all of the hardworking people in the space. It affects the customer for sure. It affects them to where they have to take what's available. They have to be stressed and trying to figure out what they're going to do the morning they wake up and something isn't running, or how do they grow their business with the right planning in place. And the inefficiency spreads through all the stakeholders. Just think how much better and value oriented it would be if each stage of this wonderful ecosystem, right, was more efficient by the bringing on board of this connection. So I guess I turned what is the status of the industry into really what's the end goal, and are we going to get there, and when? And I believe that I'm very excited because a lot of what I presented to you today is in the works. And I believe that by our fall meeting, we will be able to deliver an update to you on some of the problems being solved and some of those connections being made. So thank you very much for spending the time with me today. And with that, I'll introduce you to my favorite next presentation, which is, by the way, Jim Press and his wonderful band of panelists who have great insights that we'll share with you. Thanks.